From Peacock, IGN, and Realm, this is Rise or Die, the official companion podcast to the Peacock original series, Those About to Die. I'm your host, Dana Swartz, and on this podcast, I'll be talking to the cast and crew about bringing their stunning and brutal version of ancient Rome to life. It's hard enough to write a character people connect with, but what about one based off of a real person? Or, never mind a real person, go ahead and invent a character whole cloth. You're still placing them in a time, 79 CE, and a place, ancient Rome, that everyone thinks they know about. There's just a staggering amount to get wrong. But there's also so much to get right, to take what we know and build off of it. Today, I meet series creator and executive producer Robert Rodat. We talk about power and ambition, giving your characters life and death stakes, and how family dynamics are essential to the drama. When you're writing characters that lived thousands of years before today, how do you begin to approach that?
Over the last many, many years, decades, I've spent a good half of my pleasure reading the Roman Republic. There is a startling amount of material, and not just historian material, but personal letters. So it's not that hard to get into the heads of these characters because they reveal themselves.
Which characters in the show are real and which are fully invented?
The three Flavians, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, were historical figures, as was Berenice, who was the Judean lover of Titus. There was mention of a cocksure, immensely wealthy charioteer, and we went from there. But every time somebody goes in to sell in Hollywood a historical thing, they say, hey, this is about the past, but it's really about today, honest.
Yes.
But this one, it really is true. The fundamental issues that this society and these characters were facing are exactly the same that we're dealing with now. Extreme polarization in politics, the triumph of personal ambition over working for the Commonwealth.
Could you talk more about the theme of personal ambition? We see it across so many characters. In particular, I'm thinking of Tenax.
What's interesting about Tenax is that he and Domitian have a similar issue, which in both cases, ambition is a prerequisite for survival. Now, that is actually what distinguishes ancient Rome from now.
Yeah.
You know, people have aspirations and greed and so on, but usually in modern society, with some exceptions, but usually the penalty for failure is not death. But what we're trying to establish is, this is drama here. So we're amping up the stakes, if you will. But in both cases, you have people with ambition, and the penalty for failure is death.
Someone else, obviously with very high stakes, is Berenice, who's the lover of one of the sons of the emperor, who's trying to leverage her position to help her people. She's a real historical character, you said?
She is, and it's kind of amazing if you think about it. Vespasian was fighting a war against the Judeans, and he was the last of the four generals, actually, to gain ascendancy. And he left his son Titus to conquer the Judeans. He took Jerusalem, sacked the city, and brought back 80,000 slaves to Rome to build the Colosseum, and brought Berenice, their queen, as his lover. But what's interesting about her, and what's also interesting about Calla, she's tough. She's really tough. And Berenice, she is doing it for the sake of her children. So we forgive her excesses.
Anything to save her children.
Bingo. She puts herself in a subordinate position to Titus and has to use manipulation, which is the way of the upper class. Whereas down in the Subura, Calla can rise and assert her power. I love seeing her incrementally taking over.
They are both such amazing and interesting characters. Family is such an important theme in this show. Can you talk a little bit about the different family dynamics in this narrative?
Well, what's really interesting is we have cluster families. We have Flavians as a family. We obviously have Calla and her family. We have three Corsi brothers who arrived from Spain. We have Antony and Marsus, and you've met their daughter. And then we have Tenax, the supposed loner, who creates a sort of ersatz family in the Subura with his hangers-on.
Hmm.
We have very few lone wolves in this show. It's amazing when you think about it. It's all family, family, family. In terms of the Flavians, I was really struck by the fact that the challenge that Vespasian had to deal with, that he had the same decision to make that Caesar had when he was figuring out who his heir was going to be, which is the soldier or the politician.
So we have Titus, who's the soldier, and Domitian, who's more of the political maneuverer.
Yeah, what's fascinating is almost 100 years earlier, Caesar made the right choice because Antony, though some considered a competent soldier, was a drunken boob. And Octavian turned into Augustus and built the empire. 80 or 100 years later, you have Domitian, who is going to provide us with bad guy, malevolent, grist for the mill in seasons 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Yeah.
10.
Which family did you think was the most fun to write? Just getting to dip inside their heads.
You know, it's like you're building a house. Is it fun to build your closets and your structure? No, the fun is to throw pillows. So the most fun character is no question. The most fun character is.
I would say I think Domitian is very fun.
Yeah, he's fun.
Or Tenax, very fun.
I think Scorpus is fun.
Oh, sure. He's just having a great time.
I love Scorpus. He's hilarious.
So obviously you're someone who loves the history so much. How did you find the balance between being accurate to historical events and also having the creative license to make an entertaining television show?
We have characters acting in a way which is consistent with the social constraints of the period. Meaning you have Kala, who's down in the slums, who's able to assert her power. And you have Berenice and Antonia, who were living at the higher end of the socioeconomic ladder because they're women. They're forced to operate through the men with whom they have a relationship. That felt accurate.
Absolutely.
It was important to the writer's room that we show what was of the period and real, meaning the people at the lower end of the social, who were in the slums and the crime worlds, the sort of disadvantaged could assert their strength and power. But at the upper end of the scale, on what they called the cursus honorum, where you're dealing with senators and people of the upper class, the women in particular had to operate through the men to whom they were allied or in a relationship with. Powerful women at that scale could not publicly take power, but down in the slums they could.
So how did sports in the real world inform the show?
The seed for something comes from a number of sources, but one of the seeds is how similar chariot racing is to F1.
Yeah.
I don't know what percentage of people who walk into a really big sports stadium, ancient Rome, the Colosseum goes through their mind. I'll bet it's more than half.
Especially if they're at USC here in LA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because they dress like gladiators. But it's all of them. Just the roar of the crowd. Circus Maximus held 250,000 people. Think about that for a second. You could take everybody who goes to Boston's Fenway Park, 35,000 people. That many people lived and worked underneath Circus Maximus. 35,000 people lived and worked under there. It's mind-blowing.
Absolutely. And tell me a little bit about the title, Those About to Die. What does that title mean or evoke to you?
If you want to put your characters in jeopardy and increase the degree to which your audience is involved in your characters, you kill somebody that is important at the outset, right? So that sends a message to our audience that everybody's in jeopardy, even characters you love.
Yes, and we will avoid spoilers.
Avoid the spoilers, and I'm not going to say who it was, but we killed somebody and we regret it.
Really?
I don't want to do a spoiler, but after we're done, let's turn off the recorders and see if you can guess who that is.
So what do you hope people take away from the show?
We're trying to have a dramatic palette, which is broad. I don't want people to be scared away from the show because they think it's gory. And I don't want them to be afraid of it because it feels period. There are ways to do violence and focus on the emotional effects on the characters rather than the gore. And we've been really, I believe, responsible about that. We show as much violence as we need to for dramatic effect, but we focus on the effect on the characters.
Yeah.
We want to be like what your insurance agent will call a full service provider. We have comic relief characters. We have characters who are in love. We want to give you thrills and chills. And although we have a very high percentage of characters who are self-serving and ambitious and who I guess would fall into the under the umbrella of anti-heroes.
Yeah.
But we also have people with a moral core and a moral compass. And we have moments of gentleness and humor and love and passion mixed in with the sort of the raw sort of ambition and fighting. And of course, the emblematic sort of spectacular nature of not only what Roland is so good at as a filmmaker, but also what the Colosseum was about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We're just out of time now, but this was a phenomenal conversation.
My pleasure. It was good fun.
Next, we speak to Joco Macari and Tom Hughes, who play brothers Domitian and Titus. They talk about their on-screen competition, working with Sir Anthony Hopkins, and what it's like to play real historical figures. Here, we open with Joco discussing how he prepared.
Oh, man. Well, I'm going to start off by telling this short tale. Day one, I land in Rome, and it's an incredibly overwhelming city. It's busy, it's hectic, there's traffic everywhere. Everything there is huge and ancient. And obviously, I'm like, oh, God, I've got to really buff up on the old Roman history knowledge. But it's overwhelming. You don't know what to go for first. So I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to waltz up, have a little walk up that hill, which I now very well is the Palatine Hill, one of the most important places in Rome. And I walk up there. It's all these amazing ruins, and I'm walking around. I'm looking about, and I'm like, I'm not even going to read any of the signage. I'm not going to look at any of it. I just want to go in, soak it all up. Walk around for about an hour, stand in this one particularly amazing room, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll read a bit about this one. Look at it. First line of the sign says, "You are now standing in Emperor Domitian's bedchambers." It just makes it feel so real to be standing in the same spot that Domitian would have been standing in. It's pretty incredible.
Anyone who thinks about Jojo's story and thinks that can't happen, that's too good to happen, all of Jojo's stories sound like that, and they all prove themselves to be completely true. I think when you land in a city like that and the history is so present, we go onto a set and there'd be a build of Circus Maximus, and then you drive past it on the way home. You kind of go, wow, man, okay. Fundamentally, my role as an actor and what it kind of draws me to different characters is trying to think about the human being, and more significant, the animal that's in that position, in that time, and in that context. And so my avenue in initially has to be the writing, but more significantly from that writing has to be the character and what is he going through? Where's the complexities within him? And in truth, Titus wasn't the most easy character to find those complexities, but the more that I look, the more that I realize that's because he's kind of built protection around him in terms of how he interacts. But I think leading up to getting to Rome, that was really my focus. And then I found myself more and more immersing myself in what I imagined the rhythm of the time was. I think it's often rhythm and movement that get me into characters, and being in Rome, filming in Rome really helped with that.
That's wonderful. You two were able to capture such a relatable family dynamic within these abstract, people from thousands of years ago, rulers of the Roman Empire. How did you two manage to find that brotherly chemistry?
We just got on. I mean, Jojo might say the opposite now.
Almost immediately realized that, actually, we've got a hell of a lot in common here. And then I think essentially then proceeded to spend the next 9 months hanging out every day, pretty much.
I just trusted that Joe's going to be there knowing what the mission needs, and my job's to be there knowing what Titus needs and desires, and then we just go for it. I think you kind of by osmosis over time build this trust that you can take those risks. Perhaps it becomes easier to go in different directions because you know the other person's maybe going to go with you, but just having that trust with someone straight off the bat really helped, and it meant that we could bounce off each other. It's certainly how I felt anyway.
Obviously, there's a very important distinction to be drawn here that, me and Tom are very good mates, hanging out, chilling, keeping it real in Rome. And we spent a lot of time together, and we got to know each other very well. And I know the restaurants in Rome Tom likes, so I know what beer he's going to order on what day, depending on the temperature. But at the same time, Domitian is spending a lot of time with Titus, and as the more time you spend as actors doing scenes together, the better you are at reading each other.
Can you talk a little bit about that character dynamic? Just describe for the audience what that competition is like between your characters.
Domitian, he's grown up thinking that he's been done dirty his whole life, and that Titus, his older brother, has been handed everything on a silver platter, which I don't think is necessarily true, but that's the way that Domitian is thinking about things. And so through the years, he's built up layers and layers of resentment and bitterness. And at the point that you find us in our story, Domitian knows that Titus is an obstacle that he needs to somehow weave his way around. There's no matesy business between these two brothers. I think it's a very different relationship than I have with any of my family, certainly.
I think from Titus's perspective, he feels the overwhelm. I tried to get into Titus and go, look, how do I make this character not just the warrior? Like, why has he become that? Why does he so endlessly trust his brother, even though he knows probably deep down he shouldn't? Why can't he stick to the conviction of his instincts? I felt like it was because he was overwhelmingly had cast himself in the image of his father and had suppressed any kind of his youthful exuberance or optimism or sensitivity. I actually felt like he was potentially a very sensitive child because he's just fulfilling the role because the structure of life dictates that this is what Rome is built on and this is what he needs to do.
What was your family dynamic like once Sir Anthony Hopkins entered the scenes?
1, he's an incredible actor. 2, he's a great bloke. And 3, he was able to be all things to all people in terms of myself as Titus and Joe as Domitian, in the sense that he harnessed this mercurial ability to understand the political landscape, the smartness, the guile to be able to change direction. But also Anthony's life force is such that I walked into a room as Titus and felt immediately intimidated. And that was just incredible. Having him there for the quality he obviously is going to bring, but that was a gift and a thrill and a joy.
I think he really inspires you to play as an actor and inspires you to have fun with the scenes, to experiment, to push things, to put things out there, to just go for it. And I think that's maybe, I don't know, gave me and Tom a bit of a kick up the arse to start doing that with each other.
Yeah.
I think every scene that we went in to do with Tony or without him, we were able to really play and throw things at each other and keep things fresh.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
There's almost an inherent tension in the phrase historical drama, because we think of history as true and drama as something heightened, or certainly set apart from what's true or real. But that's when you pull your ace, a consultant who can bridge the world of history and entertainment. I sat down once more with historical consultant Justin Pollard. We discuss how to make the ancient world feel both strange and familiar, and how dramatizations can create intimacy and empathy in ways historical research can't. I'm just fascinated. How does consulting on a show like this actually work?
It all depends on the project, really. Sometimes directors just want someone on set to help with etiquette and little details. For Those About to Die, we already had some fantastic scripts. Bob Rodat had been writing scripts, who's one of the best screenwriters working. So we had a basis, and I was brought in for the embroidering in the detail, filling in those details, some of which are in the script, some of which are in the script direction, some of which are in the physical setting of it. So it's very much the additions and trying to personalize it and make it feel genuinely Roman. So putting in little details like household gods rather than just the big gods. Romans had big gods in big temples who were sort of the state religion. But in fact, the ones they cared about were their lares. They'd have a little statue in their house in a little corner, and that would be their personal god who looked after their house. And it's nice to be able to get those sorts of little details in that just give you a sense of the humanity of people. So I can bring things to life by putting in those little details.
Those About to Die also gives us some pretty graphic depictions of characters' sex lives, including a lot of queer behaviors that I think maybe modern audiences aren't always used to seeing in period or historical drama. What was the choice like a bit, not just to mention, but to depict those dynamics and physical relationships going on?
We often view today relationships in very binary terms. People are straight or gay or bi. Yeah. And you get the feeling that somehow perhaps that always was, and that's how things, but it's not the case. In the Roman world, there's much more gender fluidity. It was a part of life, another way of loving, and there was no prejudice against it. And I think it's really important. That's one of the strange things you can show about a world, in many ways, a slave-based society, quite intolerant, but a world where sexual and gender fluidity is in many ways much more everyday. It's not even something that people talk about.
Yeah.
It's just, that's how things are, and that's fine. And I think that's a really important thing to show, actually.
Yeah. It's one of those fascinating things, like you said, incredibly tolerant in some ways that I think we would take for granted today, and incredibly repressive in other ways.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, the show goes deep into Roman culture, but we also get glimpses of the Numidian, Spanish, Judean cultures. How did you help bring those cultures to life? Because I imagine there are fewer primary sources about them.
Well, mainly there are sources. It's just the sources are pretty biased. So it's Roman sources and some Greek sources. And of course, you can't read any Roman source any more so than you should read any source non-critically.
Yeah.
They wrote with a reason. But there are people who, in the Roman world, who are writing about cultures other than their own, in a way in which they're at least attempting to be even-handed and fair with it. So in there, you have a snapshot of the Roman world and the world as Romans see it. So we have to take their sources in their day and use them very carefully to ensure that we don't just take a Roman view on everything. And that's actually where drama becomes very useful, because with characters like Kwame and Kala, who don't have an authentic voice in the ancient world, who don't have writings by people like them, done for them, by taking what we know of these cultures from the Roman world and then giving them dramatic voice, you actually give them for the first time a real voice again, which is so important, because the Roman world is not just white middle-aged men. If you'd watched Roman epic movies 40, 50 years ago, you would think everyone was 40, white, male and a senator.
And being fed grapes.
Yeah, exactly. Lying on a couch being fed grapes. Most Romans were not even Italian. Obviously, they came from all over the Mediterranean world, from Britain to Parthia, from Germania to North Africa. They are of all backgrounds, of all colours, creeds. The Roman Empire, within its basic boundaries, accepted that. You could be a Roman without having to be a middle-aged white senator, which is great. The problem is finding voices for all of those people who are not those people who make it into the books. And that actually, I think, is where drama helps quite a lot, because although we cannot prove these words were said by Kwame or Kala, or even that these people in particular existed, we can use the archaeology and the writing we have to give a voice to whole new aspects of Roman society that I think people aren't used to seeing.
Was there anything that surprised you while you were working and on researching this time period? Anything you found that was unexpected?
It's always unexpected, really, because the strange thing is, if you're just doing historical research, you know the basic sources. But when you have a script instead, you have something completely different, because what you get are interactions between historical characters. So we know about Vespasian, we know about Titus, we know about Domitian, but the writers in the show, of course, have to put dialogue in their mouths. We know a few things they said, but when you get dialogue, you get that real humanity, and you start to feel as a historian, and I hope as an audience, that you actually get to know the characters in a way that isn't in the books. Whether or not that is exactly how they were, we will never know. But the writing and the characterization by the actors gives you a whole new perspective on the ancient world, and gives you an intimacy which is nearly always missing from the original sources, which tend to be reasonably sparse and a bit bald. So it's always a surprise, because in the drama, even though I can't prove it, I believe there's a great deal of truth just in that humanity that dramatic writers put into it.
We appreciate you listening to episode 4 of Rise or Die. Thanks to our wonderful guests, Robert Rodat, Joco Macari, Tom Hughes, and Justin Pollard. On our next episode, we'll talk about how the excitement around gladiatorial games and chariot races connects to modern-day sports. Until then, be sure to stream Those About to Die only on Peacock.